Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'avais manqué. Bruxelles, je t'aime. Bruxelles, je t'aime. T'es ma préférée. Bruxelles, je t'aime. Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hello there and welcome to Brussels, my love, Euronews' weekly talk show that brings you up to speed on the week across Europe. I'm Maeve McMahon. Thanks for joining us for this edition, coming to you from the European Parliament in Strasbourg. Coming up this week, 2 years after Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, MEPs ask themselves what the EU would do if it was ever attacked. Some say Brussels should pool more resources and buy European arms instead of foreign ones. Some even want a European Commissioner for Defence. But with security a power reserved for European capitals, we hear how it could actually work. And 2 years after Alexei Navalny's daughter Daria was here collecting the Sakharov Human Rights Prize on his behalf, this week Strasbourg was grieving his death. Chief mourner Yulia Navalny was also present a few days after meeting the US President Joe Biden, calling on the international community to do more to stop Putin. We hear what more the EU can do to protect Russian civil society and all those behind bars in Russian jails. Let's meet our panel this week. Petras Austrevicius, Lithuanian MEP from the Liberal Renew Europe group.
Good day.
Good to have you with us. Rasa Yuknevichnia, Lithuanian MEP, Vice Chair of the European People's Party.
Hello.
And Hannah Neumann, German MEP from the Green Group. Thank you so much for being with us and taking the time out. But before we hear your thoughts, let's just bring our viewers up to speed on what was discussed here in the Parliament this week, apart from, of course, that big vote on the nature restoration law.
It was the 2-year mark of full-scale war in Europe that was on people's minds this week in Strasbourg. After MEPs paid their respect and voted on EU budget funds for Ukraine, talks quickly moved to how to prevent a war on European soil. For decades, growth was the priority. Democracy perhaps taken for granted. But in 2024, EU defense is now top of the agenda. But with security still a competence of EU capitals, we ask how the 27 will be able to move this heavy tank and assure that it promotes the manufacturing of European arms.
Louise Albert is reporting there, and you could feel a real sense of urgency in that debate this week, that this item just wasn't prioritised for decades and that was a mistake. Hannah, can the EU catch up here?
Well, it has to catch up, and I think we need to work on 2 tracks. The first one is getting to Ukraine what it urgently needs, no matter where we buy it, and we also need to prioritise orders, for example, in the European defence companies. And the other one is making sure that we fill the gaps that we have been lamenting for decades, but now we really need to do it, which is to scale up European defence industry to produce everything we need.
Rasa, how will these talks that we saw in Strasbourg this week lead to real action?
Yeah, I think yesterday we had to do what we are trying to do now or to discuss now. I don't know, first of all, if everyone in the European Union, including leaders, maybe leaders, but not in every country, understand the scope, scale and seriousness of the situation we are today in. Yes, everything is at stake. The world order is collapsing almost, and I am afraid that our democracy is at stake, not only just one or another country. So, of course, we need urgently, we need support, military support for Ukraine. Second, we need plan for the Ukraine's victory.
And it looks like Europeans are on board. I was taking a look at a recent Eurobarometer and it said that 2/3 of EU citizens agree, Petras, that actually more money should be spent on defence.
Indeed. I completely, convinced that Europeans do care about their way of life. They want, to keep European system in place and intact. And I'm sure, they are going to, make some decisions and to support those decisions, even at certain, probably social economic sacrifice. Because, well, let's be frank, Ukraine needs a lot of money, in a long term. Now we are just stabilizing the situation, but how about a victory? I mean, for victory, we will have to place even more money. So that's why Europeans have to be addressed, Europeans have to be explained, and Europeans every time have to be asked for a great support and greater support for Ukraine and ours.
And speaking of Ukraine, actually, last Saturday, the President of the European Commission visited Kyiv to mark 2 years since full-scale war. And I was, in fact, with her there. And it was a really grim reminder of how close the war is, but actually how far it is in the minds of us here in the European Union. Sure. And this week, Ursula von der Leyen was in Strasbourg in that debate, telling MEPs that it was, quote, time to wake up urgently.
This is not just about defeating bullies on the battlefield, but across all our societies. Europe has started to grasp the urgency and the scale of the challenge that is ahead of us, but there is a lot more to do, and we need to move fast. The threat of war may not be imminent, but it is not impossible.
Strong words there from the European Commission President. I guess the question you're asking, especially in your country, is could it be invaded, and would you be ready for such a scenario?
Look, when I am getting this question, I am always asking, we are members of NATO, we are members of EU. It means that if Lithuania would be attacked, all of us will be attacked. And sometimes it a little bit upsets me that people in other countries, they don't realize that it's not possible attack against Lithuania or Baltic states. It will be everything destroyed. European Union, NATO, everything will be destroyed, including, by the way, the United States also will be in big problem because, look, China is looking, other dictators are looking how we will be able to solve those problems, attacks, and if are we able to respond?
Of course. I mean, as a NATO member, you would have access to the guarantees of Article 5, but I think there was a couple of American generals saying that it could take time for that scenario, and therefore, you know, you might need to be prepared yourself. Hannah, what do you think?
Well, I can only agree with my Lithuanian colleague, and this is what frustrates me a lot when I listen to the, let's say, Western or Central European debate, where people still think, well, it's happening somewhere else. Because one thing is clear, if one member state of the European Union is being attacked, either we stand all united or the European Union is gone.
Yeah.
And that is why it doesn't make any sense that we fall back to these nationalist reflexes when we talk about procurement, when we talk about who gets what first. Because at the moment, still 27 member states have their own shopping list, and they procure whatever they think they need, and they put it in their backyard. But that's not what we need. We need to have the same discussion that we had during the Cold War with NATO, where we had strategic depots of ammunition, where there were people sitting together, making up their minds who needs what first in case of the most likely attack. And I don't understand why we are not moving to this discussion seriously on the European level and discussing things such as a defence commissioner. Well, it doesn't hurt, but it also doesn't help at the moment. Discussing things such as the European army, again, it doesn't hurt, but it doesn't help us right now. What we need to discuss right now is we need to procure together, and we need to make a decision who gets the equipment first, including maybe Ukraine.
You know, Putin started this war because he believed and still believe that we are weak. The West democracies are weak. And the democracies divided, and the democracies are not able to have the right response. So that's why he started this war. And now we must do everything to prove ourselves that we can win this war.
And I guess the question we're asking ourselves, are Europeans ready to fight as well? I mean,
you are right.
Petras.
It's absolutely a valid question, you know, and I mean, next to the question, I mean, do we support Ukraine? I mean, does our support bring enough, I mean, for Ukraine to withstand Russian aggression? The second question should be, if not our support for Ukraine, are we ready, I mean, to take a fight if Putin's, you know, forces, I mean, cross eastern border of the European Union? I mean, you know, it's absolutely valid question.
And what about the proposal this week of Emmanuel Macron to send European troops? I mean, some MEPs were not pleased with that comment. Hannah, what about your group? What do they think about that?
Well, it's one of these grands discours de Emmanuel Macron. He comes up with nice ideas, discussing things that may be far away. But what we need is conventional weapons to Ukraine. And on that one, France doesn't deliver. So I would prefer him to work on delivering conventional stuff to Ukraine rather than having some hypothetical debates about the future. And we need to discuss one other thing. And here, frankly said, I don't agree with you, Petras.
On what?
In the moment where we are in such a substantial crisis in the European Union, because we have the war in Ukraine, where we support a lot, and where we face the climate crisis, we need to make sure that we don't run into a social division. So savings, working on a debt break as we have it in Germany, I don't think is the right moment.
But meanwhile, we do have programmes now, like the ASAP, right, where for the first time ever, European taxpayers will be paying for arms and the manufacturing of arms.
Not just the manufacture, that's the interesting thing we need to keep in mind. The weapons, military equipment cannot be bought from the European Union budget. So when we buy the weapons, this has to come from pooled funds from the member states. It's also taxpayers' money, but it's not the European Union budget. But what is coming with ASAP is the ramping up of the production capacities. So we're supporting the defense industry to produce more.
I wouldn't say so. Look, I think we have to make such decisions, many decisions probably in close future, which would allow us to deter any aggressor. So that's why I don't stop on the decision we already made about ASAP. For example, I'm much in favor of the common borrowing, issuing the EU bonds in order to finance European military industry as well as our military capacities, not for 1 year, not for 2, not for 5, for 10 years. We know, how long and how expensive sometimes it takes to build really a very effective military capacity to deter any potential aggressor. So that's why...
It would be good if you could convince your German liberal colleagues there, please.
Well, that is, of course, the challenge. And I think we're giving our viewers a really interesting flavour of the actual debate that took place this week in the European Parliament. And one organisation that's following these talks very closely about European defence cooperation is Rasmussen Global. It was set up by the former head of NATO, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, and the CEO is a man called Fabrice Potier, and he told us why he thought these talks in Strasbourg this week were so crucial.
One is war is coming. We have war in the middle of Europe, Russia's war in Ukraine, and should actually Russia be successful, we will have a very aggressive imperialist country at the border of the EU. And we need to prepare that. And the second reason is Trump is coming. If he's elected, there will definitely be much more, I would say, a disruptive relationship between the US and the European Union, between the US and NATO. And Trump might actually want to start undoing some of the kind of post-Cold War agreement and consensus on US commitment to Europe.
Fabrice Potier there, stressing how Europe has counted on the US support for too long. Would you agree with him, Rasa, or is he scaremongering there with those comments?
Yeah, I agree, more than agree. I think we must realize, first of all, that it's not a short-term crisis. We must be prepared for long-term war.
Regardless of who's in the White House.
Look,
absolutely.
But we in EPP, we are now discussing the plan for the victory of Ukraine. Because without that, it will be no stable security in our continent. Now we have two wars in southern neighborhood and also eastern neighborhood. Who knows about the possible other crisis worldwide? Not necessarily because Trump could be elected, but the resources, American resources, our resources, are not enough to fight today. And this is, I think, what we first of all must realize together, that we must be prepared for long-term crisis or war in our continent. And then all options possible on the table. We must go out of this box we lived in, our rules and everything, and find all possible options, including money, including private sector.
But do we have time even to have all these discussions? I feel like these discussions have been delayed for so long.
Yes, you're right.
On ending the war. Like, do we have a proper coherent policy here?
I think we have a proper European policy. The question is, do all the EU member states fall in line? Do they deliver what is necessary? And there, I don't think enough is happening right now, including coming from my own Chancellor, who we Greens heavily criticize for not, for example, sending the Taurus there. But as you mentioned, Trump, I also think we shouldn't, and the German sayings, to basically kick out the kid with the bathwater. So Trump is making a mess. He's maybe the best part of the disinformation strategy of Putin, because whenever he says something weird, everybody talks about it. So I think the European Union has to strengthen its capacity to act independently if needed, but always as the European pillar in NATO, because also we all know it, in the short and medium term, there is no way we can fill in for the capacities also in the nuclear sector that the US have. So even if Trump wins, and let's see, it's not set.
It's not set, even though in this town,
we keep the US in NATO.
Even though in this town, in Brussels and Strasbourg, in the corridors here, it feels like he has already won. But just another theme that came up here in Strasbourg during those talks was the threat of disinformation and cyber attacks, especially in the upcoming European elections, which are, by the way, in less than 100 days. And while I was in Kyiv last Saturday, I had the opportunity to speak to Mykola Balaban about his work. He works for the Ukrainian Centre for Strategic Communication.
Europe should understand that it is the anniversary of full-scale attack and warfare of Russia against Ukraine, but at the same time, it is also an anniversary of full-scale information warfare of Russia against Europe. So, in my opinion, Europe should be, it's not scared, but should be prepared to the big attack, information attack from malign actors, maybe not only Russia, to democratic process around the European countries.
Mykola Balaban there speaking to me in Kyiv last weekend, just a stone's throw from Marinsky's palace, where President Zelensky resides. Petros, I'm looking at you now for this next question. Do you think the EU is prepared for this threat? Because in that debate, many MEPs said that they weren't, and their militaries were not either.
Not at all. I think we still live in a kind of the bubble of comfort in Europe. I understand sometimes hesitation from the US side. I mean, they think that Europeans should take more responsibility about themselves. I mean, for good and bad. But it's a good reminder for us that a war against Ukraine is just 12 hours from our eastern border. So in 12 hours, I mean, you are almost in trenches. I mean, you see and you hear a voice and you see a face of a very ugly war, which is going on now. So my point is, if we are serious, I mean, if the EU is serious about taking all the necessary decisions in this regard, we have to have a war cabinet. So that's why today I spoke, and this week we spoke in Strasbourg about what should be done. I mean, in order to, not to follow this situation, but to overrun. I mean, to be ready on our acts.
Rasa, War Cabinet, Defence Commissioner, what is your take on all this?
Yes, of course. First of all, what we can do on our current treaties, it means that economy is a responsibility of EU, and we can have to start our defence union from building capabilities with the defence industries. Hybrid warfare as well is utmost important. We must realize, first of all, we must start from evaluation of, right evaluation of the threat assessment. And this is, I think, also the problem, because not everyone understands that it's not only front line in the eastern part of Ukraine, but also western front line, where we must be ready to fight this, fight for the brains, for mindset of the people, because every election is like a battle and will be like a battle for everything. So
final comment with yourself.
We're
running out of time, but just a final reaction there.
We need to transfer competences from the national level to the European level to make sure that we are up to speed, and we need to fight social injustices, because social insecurity is a fertile breeding ground for disinformation.
OK, well, I'm afraid we will have to leave it there as we have run out of time. But stay with us, because after the break, we'll be discussing the sombre mood in Strasbourg as MEPs grieve the death of Alexei Navalny in company of his widow, Yulia. Stay with us here on Euronews. Welcome back to Brussels, my love, Euronews' weekend talk show. Coming to you this week from Strasbourg, I'm with my guests Hannah Neumann and Rasa Yukovichenia. Unfortunately, the MEP Petros had to leave us quickly to present a report in the hemicycle. Now back to Strasbourg. The hero here was Yulia Navalny, the widow of Alexei Navalny, who died in a Siberian prison back on the 16th of February. Her emotional words brought the whole plenary to a standstill this week, including those sitting on the far right of the chamber. Take a listen now to her message to the European Union.
If you really want to defeat Putin, you have to become an innovator. You have to stop being boring. You cannot hurt Putin with another resolution or another set of sanctions. That is no different from the previous ones. You cannot defeat him by thinking he is a man of principle who has morals and rules.
Yulia Navalny there suggesting that the European Union's approach to stop Putin is just not working. What would you say to that?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to say that it's very close to our hearts, and my heart personally was happening because my grandfather died in a Siberian gulag. We know what does it mean. Bodies of our freedom fighters were lying in front of the churches, and mothers were not allowed to come and to cry next to them and to take those bodies. So today we are witnessing exactly the same, only in the 21st century. And that's why I think was a huge mistake not to elaborate, not to condemn communists what communists did. And today this history is back. They are driving back with the same atrocities, the same fight.
That is absolutely horrific and so sad that just 2 years ago his daughter was here picking up the prize on his behalf. And this week you were inside that European Parliament plenary for that moment. What was it like?
I was in that plenary, but I also was at Munich Security Conference just 2 or 3 hours after we had the first information that Alexei Navalny was killed. Yulia Navalny also appeared on stage, and she had this absolute focus and strength and determination. And, well, me being a mother and a married wife, I was very sorry.
You were brought to tears, and it was a very emotional moment, and you could see even members of the far right in the plenary also brought to tears, often who don't show as much emotion perhaps as others. But her point there when she said that you are taking a boring approach, as in these sanctions are not working.
Sanctions are not working. I don't agree that sanctions are not working. They are, but the problem is that we are not enough prepared for circumvention of sanctions and implementation of sanctions. So we must do more. But on the other hand, look, today we have that every family in Ukraine, they are suffering from the same killing machine, Kremlin killing machine. And a lot of people already, Russians already were killed, poisoned. And this, for me, what Putin is doing today, and this personality, Putin, I mean, is two in one, Hitler and Stalin together.
And Yulia Navalny also said that there's millions of Russians, tens of millions of Russians that are against his evil. And in fact, as we're speaking here, as you're rightly pointing out, thousands of innocent Russians and Ukrainians are behind bars in Russian prisons and also in the Ukrainian occupied territories. And most have, in fact, no status under Russian law. And for more on their conditions, I actually had the opportunity to speak to Petro Yatsenko. He's from the Ukrainian Centre for the Treatment of Prisoners of War.
Very important to remember about prisoners of war, and especially about civilians, Ukrainians who are still in Russian captivity, who are should be freed, and who are in very bad conditions because Russians never follow international humanitarian law.
Petro Yatsenko there speaking to me last Saturday in Kyiv. I also met a young girl from Crimea whose brother is behind bars for months, and she fears that he'll also end up perhaps having the similar fate to Alexei Navalny. Hannah, what more can the European Union do here? What more leverage does it have to help the families of these political prisoners and also for Russian civil society?
When it comes to the fate of these prisoners, indeed, our means are limited at the moment to resolutions, to calling on international organizations being allowed, for example, to check on the situation of the prisoners and to increase pressure on Putin, because down the line, I mean, if Ukraine succeeds against Putin, there is a fair chance that people can be released. But there is more that we can do inside the European Union to support Russian civil society critical of Putin when it comes to giving them visas, when it comes to supporting them in their work from here. We have, for example, a lot of opposition media that tries to work from here, that can still reach parts of Russia. And on this one, I think we are too strict in the conditions that we apply for them to come, or too weak in our support still to allow them to continue their political work from here. So I think here there is more we can do, where we can decide 100%. It doesn't need Putin for us to let these people in. It doesn't need Putin for us to give them good conditions to work.
What would your take be on that? And also, please enlighten us about the propaganda machine as well that we were discussing earlier.
Yeah, but first of all, I would like to remind you, all of us, that we have more than 1,400 imprisoned political prisoners in Belarus by Lukashenko also. We must add and not forget them. What to do and how to help, first and utmost important, is don't be afraid to defeat Putin's regime. The only way to do this is to help Ukraine to win this war. I don't see any other options. Of course, together we must speak about that. We must not to forget people like Kara-Murza, Vladimir Kara-Murza, Ilya Yashin, those brave Russians. They are now in huge danger, and we must speak about them. We must do everything the best. But most important is to fight to defeat this evil of 21st century, Putin and his regime.
And Rasa, you mentioned Belarus. We heard as well from the dictator there, Lukashenko, who's been in power for over 30 years, that he would also like to run again. So thank you for bringing up that point as well about the plight of many people in Belarus behind bars, many innocent people. But I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much. We will definitely come back to this topic. But thank you to our panel, and thank you so much for watching. See you soon here on Euronews. Welcome back to Brussels, my love. I'm Maeve McMahon, and alongside the MEPs Rasa Yukovic and Hannah Neumann, we are talking through the main themes that were up for discussion here in Strasbourg this week. And one item that caught our eye, as it's a topic very close to our viewers' heart, as a new report on human rights in the European Union and beyond. The Spanish member of the European Parliament, Nacho Sanchez Amor, wrote this report and concluded that the situation is disastrous across the world and also in Europe. He feels that human rights should be discussed more in the same breath as when we talk about a geopolitical European Union. So, ladies, I'm sure it's been a busy week. I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at this report and how you felt about it and what it can change.
It's an annual report, so we do that every year. We look at the situation around the world in human rights and the role of the European Union in all of that. And I think it is important that we do that every year, because with all this discussion about wars and about defense, we tend to forget human rights. But it's actually the political freedoms that people have here and that others want to have, and the diversity that we cherish here and others want to have, that make Putin afraid, which is one of the reasons why he is attacking the European Union. So I think it is crucial that we don't forget that this is actually the founding spirit of this union.
And was it a mistake, perhaps, Rasa, to not discuss security and human rights on the same institutional level and in the same rooms?
I think it's very much interrelated, because I already mentioned before that today we have the situation when world order is collapsing, including everything related with democracy, with the human rights. When we speak about this war and when we are looking for what Ukrainians are fighting for. They are fighting for European way of life. They are fighting for human rights. Everything we enjoy. Myself, I can say from my own life, I lived half of my life in occupied by Soviet Union Lithuania. So I know the difference. I know what does it mean to live without any human rights and to live in the world I live now. For me, it looks like always like a miracle a little bit that I am here.
And that's why we've seen so many Ukrainians and Ukrainian diaspora as well in Europe take to the streets last weekend waving the European Union flag. But just one organisation that read all 98 points of this human rights report that was presented this week in Strasbourg is Amnesty International. So we wanted to hear how they felt about it. So we spoke to Eve Getty, their director.
And as Amnesty, we very much welcome the broad coverage of issues and trends that it's in the report, and also that it points out key areas where EU member states themselves are contributing to human rights violations. But the report also shows some of the double standards by the Parliament, particularly Europe's failure to hold its close allies accountable. There's a failure in the report to recognise Israel's crime against humanity of apartheid against the Palestinians. Also, a failure to address the EU's policy towards Gulf states, for instance, which has largely silenced human rights. So these double standards not only undermine the important work of the EU, but I think also show some cracks in the Parliament.
Eve Getty there from Amnesty International. Hannah, would you have a comment there?
Well, what worries me a lot when I travel to some of these countries where the situation is very dire, such as Afghanistan, when I speak to my Iranian friends, they always tell us the European Union is the only ones who still care about these things, who still make it an issue. So that's a good sign, but indeed, often we don't fully live up to these expectations and we could do more. When it comes to visa for human rights defenders, for example, why are Iranian women that are being shot in their eye still stuck in Turkey and lack the medical equipment and the medical care? We could just take them. Some of the trade deals that we are doing, where we always say trade benefits are conditional to improvements in the human rights, and when there are no improvements on the human rights, we don't revoke the privileges.
But I'm afraid, ladies, we will have to leave it there. We're out of time already, but thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for your contributions. And thank you so much for watching. If you've any comments on anything you've seen here today, please do reach out. Our email address is brusselsmylove@euronews.com. If you want more in-depth analysis on any of the thoughts that you've heard today on the panel, you can also check out euronews.com. See you soon.